The scream cuts through the stone like a blade. It starts low, a strangled cry, and then swells into something raw and unbroken, echoing through the freezing corridors of Pembroke Castle. Outside, the January wind hammers at the walls, carrying with it the roar of the sea far below, where black waves smash against the cliff with the force of cannon fire. The air tastes of salt and iron. Even here, deep within the keep, you feel the cold gnawing at your bones. The chamber is dim, its only light the shivering flames of half-melted candles. Shadows sway along the rough walls, warping into shapes that seem to lean closer with every flicker. Thick tapestries do little to keep the wind from slipping in through cracks, making the flames bow and gutter. The smell inside is heavy and suffocating, a cloying mix of smoke from smoldering herbs, the sharp sting of sweat, and the coppery breath of blood. On the bed, she writhes, a girl in years, but already forced into a woman's battle. Her skin gleams wet, her lips tremble, her small frame clenches against pain that rolls through her in merciless waves. Barely 13, her body is too narrow, too slight. Each contraction feels like it might break her apart. Around her, midwives move with practiced urgency, their skirts brushing the rushes underfoot. Their whispers are in Latin, their hands quick and sure, though their eyes betray the dread they will not voice. A silver reliquary glints near her pillow, its cold metal pressed close as if it might anchor her to this world. Outside the chamber, measured footsteps trace the same worn path over and over. The man walking knows the stakes. A young widow is in labor, and the child she carries may live or die, and with that life or death, the fate of a kingdom may shift. This is not merely a birth. It is a knife-edge moment in history. If she survives, she will never be the same. If the child survives, he may grow to claim a throne drenched in the blood of civil war. And if both are lost, a dynasty will end before it has even begun. Another scream tears from her throat, cracking the air, drowning out the wind and the sea. Her hands twist in the blood-stained sheets. Her breath comes in short, broken gasps. And you stand in the suffocating heat of that room, knowing you are watching the moment that could shape or shatter the destiny of England. If you've ever stumbled on a moment in history that's as heartbreaking as it is world-changing, you'll feel right at home here on Cursed Chronicles. Subscribe so you don't miss the ones they never wanted you to know. May 1443. Bletsoe Castle rises from the Bedfordshire fields, its towers framed by a pale spring sky. Inside its walls, a child draws her first breath, a daughter named Margaret Beaufort. She is born into a world that weighs bloodlines like gold, and hers is the rarest coin of all. Through her father, John Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, she is the great-granddaughter of John of Gaunt, fourth son of King Edward III. That drop of royal blood, so thin and distant to most, runs thick in her veins, and with it comes both privilege and peril. The Beaufort name carries a complicated legacy. Born from the legitimized children of John of Gaunt and Catherine Swynford, it is a line acknowledged by kings, yet barred from claiming the crown itself. But in an England where dynasties rise and fall through marriage and war, even a barred claim can be sharpened into a weapon. Margaret is too young to know it, but from the moment she is swaddled, she is not simply a child. She is a potential bargaining chip in the struggle for England's throne. Her father's shadow hangs long over her life, but it will be gone almost as soon as it falls. In the summer of 1444, barely a year after Margaret's birth, John Beaufort is dead. The official word is fever, but fever is a convenient curtain in an age where truth is dangerous. Some whisper of poison, others of despair. A suicide born from the humiliation of defeat in France. He had led campaigns in the last bitter years of the 100 Years' War, watching English victories crumble into ruin. Men saw him return from the front with hollow eyes and a tremor in his hands, the weight of failure etched into his face. One spring morning, he was found lifeless in his chambers. Whether his death was illness, treachery, or the final act of a broken man, it left his daughter an orphan in all but name. Her mother, Margaret Beauchamp of Bletsoe, wastes no time. In a realm where a widow without protection is a target, she remarries quickly, to Lionel de Wells, a seasoned nobleman and loyal servant of the crown. But the marriage shifts the balance in young Margaret's life. By law and custom, her wardship, the right to decide her future, passes to the king. The decision is not about her welfare. It is about her blood, her inheritance, and the political value of both. From this moment, Margaret's life is no longer hers to shape. She will be molded to fit the designs of men who see her not as a child, but as a key to alliances, a pawn on a board where the pieces are crowned in gold and stained in blood. The Wars of the Roses are still years away, but the factions that will tear England apart are already stirring. Margaret's royal link, however faint, will ensure she is drawn into that storm. Somewhere in the stone corridors of Bletsoe, her mother may have imagined a safe life for her daughter, one of piety, learning, and quiet estates. But history had already marked her. The path before her leads not to safety, but to the heart of a conflict where her body, her marriage, and even her womb will be used as weapons in a war she did not start. If you believe the most dangerous pieces in history's game were not kings, but the girls who bore their blood, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, where we bring you the stories they tried to bury. She is 6 years old when the king decides what her future will be. In the great hall of Bletsoe, parchment is unrolled, seals are pressed into wax, and her name is bound to that of John de la Pole, a boy she has never met, heir to one of the most powerful families in England. The de la Poles are kin to the crown through marriage, their fortunes tied to William de la Pole, Duke of Suffolk, the king's closest advisor. For the men who control Margaret's wardship, this match is perfect. Her royal Beaufort blood fused with Suffolk's influence will create an alliance of wealth, legitimacy, and power. To Margaret, it means nothing. She can't read the contract. She doesn't understand its terms. But in a realm where daughters are currency, understanding is irrelevant. The ink binds her all the same. The Duke of Suffolk is a man who has climbed higher than his birth would ever have allowed, and made enemies for every step. He orchestrated the marriage between Henry VI and Margaret of Anjou, surrendering valuable French territories as part of the bargain. The loss of Maine and Anjou enraged the English nobility and humiliated the crown before France. Whispers of treachery coil through court like smoke, and they carry Suffolk's name. By the spring of 1450, those whispers erupt into open hatred. Suffolk is arrested, accused of treason. The charges are as much about political vengeance as any crime, but they are enough to seal his fate. The king spares him a public execution, ordering him into exile. He never reaches it. Somewhere in the narrow waters of the Channel, his ship is intercepted. He is dragged before his captors, pirates, rebels, or hired blades. No one can say for certain, and forced to kneel on the deck. The blade they use is dull, hacking again and again before his head comes free. His body is thrown into the surf, the sea taking what the axe could not. News of the murder spreads fast, carried on the same roads and rivers that once bore Suffolk's influence. With it comes the collapse of every alliance tied to his name. The betrothal between Margaret Beaufort and John de la Pole is quietly dissolved. There is no ceremony to mark the breaking, no apology. The promise of her future is simply swept aside, as though it had never existed. She is 6 years old, and already she has been bartered and discarded once. She begins to understand, perhaps not in words, but in instinct, that her life will not move by her own will. Power can vanish overnight. Alliances can turn to ash. Survival will depend on how quickly she can change course when the ground shifts beneath her. It is the first lesson in a truth she will carry for the rest of her life. To live, she must be as changeable as the men who control her, bending when the wind turns, and waiting for the moment when she can twist it to her own advantage. Would you have survived being used as a bargaining chip before you could even read? Tell me in the comments, because Margaret didn't have the choice. She is 12 when the second bargain is struck. This time, the contract does not bind her to a boy, but to a man, Edmund Tudor, Earl of Richmond, half-brother to King Henry VI. The match is not born of affection, nor even of convenience. It is a calculation, made in the quiet chambers of power, designed to fuse two bloodlines into a single weapon for the Lancastrian cause. The Tudors are still new to England's highest ranks, their legitimacy questioned by those who measure worth in centuries. Their father, Owen Tudor, had been little more than a courtier until he caught the eye of Catherine of Valois, the widowed queen of Henry V. Their secret marriage caused a scandal that rippled through court, but it bound the Tudor name to the royal line. Now, King Henry VI sees in his half-brother Edmund an instrument, and in Margaret Beaufort the perfect key to lock the Tudor fortune to the throne. The wedding takes place in the same stone walls where Margaret's earliest memories were shaped, her childhood home at Bletsoe. The Great Hall is dressed in tapestries that speak of victories and noble blood, banners drooping heavily in the autumn air. Musicians play in the gallery, their strings and pipes weaving a pattern meant to sound like celebration. But beneath the color, there is a chill that no fire can touch. Margaret stands in a gown heavy with embroidery, the fabric stiff against her narrow shoulders. Jewels catch the candlelight, but their weight drags on her small frame. She listens as vows are spoken, words heavy with meaning to everyone but her. She does not yet understand the fine print of this union, that her body will become a vessel for the ambitions of men she barely knows, that her worth will be measured in heirs, not in years lived. Edmund Tudor, in his 20s, stands tall beside her. He is seasoned in politics and war, his life already marked by the endless maneuverings of the court. His expression is solemn, his voice steady, his presence commanding. For him, this marriage is duty and advantage. For her, it is the end of girlhood. The feast that follows is a display of plenty. Roasted meats carried on silver platters, spiced wine filling goblets, the low murmur of nobles calculating the advantages this union will bring. Outside those walls, the first whispers of the conflict that will become the Wars of the Roses are stirring. Inside, a girl is being reshaped into a wife. The consummation does not wait. In the dim light of the marriage chamber, with the door closed and the whispers of celebration still bleeding through the walls, Margaret faces what the contract has demanded. Her body is slight, unprepared, her mind still tuned to the rhythms of childhood. But there is no pause for readiness, no delay for safety. What happens that night will leave marks deeper than any visible wound. In the weeks that follow, her body begins to change. Before her 13th birthday, she is carrying a child, the first and only she will ever bear. Outside her chambers, England moves toward war. Inside, a girl not yet grown is asked to nurture the next link in a dynasty's chain, no matter the cost to herself. If you think history's tragedies are written only on battlefields, remember the wars that were fought in quiet rooms, and subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, where those voices are never left in silence. Autumn, 1456. The air in Wales carries the first bite of winter, and with it, the scent of unrest. Edmund Tudor rides out at the head of his men, not for glory, but for the cold necessities of power. Yorkist influence is growing, and to hold Lancastrian ground in the west, he must secure loyalty through both diplomacy and force. Margaret remains behind, heavy with child, her 13th birthday still months away. She is lodged in the safety of Lampe Palace, a quieter holding far from the shifting lines of conflict. Then the message comes. Carmarthen Castle has fallen. Edmund has been taken. The details are muddied before they even reach her. Some say it was a swift strike, the garrison unprepared, Edmund caught in the chaos as his scattered forces were overrun. Others speak of betrayal, allies whose loyalties bent under pressure. A gate opened in the night. Whatever the cause, the Earl of Richmond is now a prisoner, and in the turbulence of civil war, that is as good as a death sentence. What follows is a silence that gnaws at the edges of the truth. Weeks pass. No ransom, no negotiations. Then, word arrives. Edmund Tudor is dead. The official cause: plague. In the damp, crowded cells of medieval castles, disease is common, and plague is a convenient answer. But the swiftness of his decline, the refusal to allow physicians near him, whispers of confinement in isolation. All of it feeds the suspicion that the illness was a mask for something darker. Poison, perhaps. A quiet killing that leaves no clear trail. For Margaret, the cause matters little. The fact is enough. She is 13 years old, a widow, and still carrying the child of a man whose body lies cold in enemy-held stone. It is Edmund's younger brother, Jasper Tudor, who comes for her. His arrival at Lampe is not in the manner of a rescuer, but of a man stepping into a duty he cannot refuse. The girl in his care is both a blood relative and a vessel for something greater, the heir to the Tudor line, the living proof of their link to Lancaster. Protecting her is not simply chivalry. It is political necessity. He takes her to Pembroke Castle, his stronghold perched on the cliffs above Milford Haven. The journey is slow and grueling, the roads churned to mud by autumn rains, the air wet with salt carried inland from the restless sea. Margaret travels in a litter, every jolt of the wheels jarring through her small frame, each bump a fresh wave of discomfort on a body already strained by pregnancy. The ride stretches for days, the horizon never still. When Pembroke's walls finally rise before her, they are not a comfort. The keep towers above the river like a warning, ancient stone built for endurance, not warmth. Winter gathers early here, sweeping in from the sea to cut through every crack. Fires burn constantly in the great hearths, but the warmth never truly lingers. In this fortress, Margaret will wait out the final months of her pregnancy under Jasper's watch. She is safer here than anywhere else in Wales, but safety is a relative thing. Outside the walls, England moves deeper into the blood feud that will become the Wars of the Roses. Inside, a young widow walks the echoing halls, her footsteps swallowed by the stone, carrying a child who is already an object of ambition, a symbol of a cause, a prize that others may try to claim or destroy. If you think she deserved better than being widowed before she even finished growing, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles so these women aren't forgotten again. The winter of 1456 closes over Pembroke like a clenched fist. The castle, built on a limestone promontory, juts out above the waters of the Pembroke River, its great round keep dominating the skyline. Below, the tidal waters ebb and surge, dark and restless, before spilling into the wide mouth of Milford Haven. Beyond that lies only the steel-gray expanse of the sea, endless and cold. The walls here have stood for centuries, their purpose not comfort, but endurance. They are a shield against siege, a defiance to the elements, and a reminder that survival often means learning to live in a place that will never fully welcome you. Inside, the air is never still. The sea wind forces its way through every gap in the stone, rattling shutters, slipping beneath doors, snuffing out candles in long, wheezing breaths. Tapestries hang thick on the walls, but they sway with each draft, as if the castle itself inhales and exhales around its inhabitants. Even in the great hall, where fires roar and the hearths and sparks whirl up into the blackness of the chimney, the heat cannot banish the cold entirely. Supplies arrive when the weather allows, but the winter roads are treacherous. Carts bog down in the sodden earth, rivers swell over their banks, and the threat of armed men on the roads forces many to turn back. Salted meat, dried peas, coarse bread, these are the staples. Fresh food is rare, and when it does appear, it is treasured. Water is drawn from the well, icy to the touch, its surface sometimes sheened with a fragile film of frost. Margaret moves through this place like a shadow. Her belly swells beneath her gowns, and every step is measured, careful. The castle staircases are narrow and steep, the stone worn smooth and slick in the damp. She spends hours in her chamber, the wind drumming against the arrow slits, the smell of the sea seeping into her clothes. There is nowhere to go, no respite from the sound of the waves breaking below or the cries of seabirds wheeling overhead. The isolation presses in until even the air feels heavy. A physician, his name lost to time, though some later accounts place Dr. Lewis of Caerleon in her service, examines her and finds cause for alarm. She is too young, her pelvis too narrow. The child, already large, lies in a difficult position. He speaks in low tones to Jasper Tudor, words meant to stay behind closed doors. This birth will not be easy. In such cases, the odds are grim. A misjudged intervention could end the lives of both mother and child. Waiting offers little more comfort. Each week increases the strain on her small frame. The physician prescribes light exercise, fresh air when the weather permits, and careful nourishment. Instructions easier to give than to fulfill in a fortress locked in winter's grip. Still, she walks the battlements when she can, her cloak snapping in the wind, her gaze fixed on the gray horizon. From up here, the sea stretches like a sheet of iron to the edge of the world, and the land feels equally distant. She is perched between them, a young widow carrying the fragile promise of a future dynasty, in a place built for war but now serving as her prison. Every night, the castle groans and shifts in the wind. Every morning, the cold greets her like a hand on the spine. And every day, the weight inside her grows, along with the unspoken knowledge that this winter may end with both a birth and a burial. If you want these forgotten winters, these silent battles fought behind stone walls, to be remembered as fiercely as the wars outside them, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, where the shadows of history still speak. January 28, 1457. The wind off the sea has sharpened to a blade, slicing through the battlements of Pembroke Castle, moaning in the arrow slits like the breath of something ancient and restless. The sky is a washed-out gray, the light thin, reluctant. Inside, in a small chamber heavy with the smell of tallow candles and burning herbs, Margaret Beaufort's labor begins. It comes suddenly, a deep, wrenching pain that doubles her over as she walks the inner wall walk for the exercise her physician insists will help her through the birth. The midwives rush to her side, their hands cold against her skin as they guide her back to her chamber. The door shuts. The fire is stoked until the air shimmers with heat, but the cold lingers in the corners like a shadow. The birth is slow to advance. Her hips are too narrow, the child's head is too large. In an age with no forceps as we know them, no anesthesia, no antisepsis, the tools of midwifery are simple and brutal. Knives for cutting cords, hooks for retrieving the dead, linen cloths, coarse thread, wooden bowls of steaming water, and pouches of dried herbs. Pennyroyal to stir contractions, rosemary for strength, lavender to soothe, myrrh to guard against evil. Smoke from the brazier curls through the chamber, mixing with the copper tang of blood and the salt of sweat. Hours pass. Her cries grow hoarse, breaking into gasps that sound more animal than human. The midwives exchange looks, quick, tight glances that acknowledge what no one says aloud. A child trying to birth a child may not survive the night. The physician bends close to Jasper Tudor, his voice a thread. The babe is in distress. The mother's pulse is weakening. Choices must be made. None are good. Manual extraction is attempted, the most dangerous of their options. The midwife leading the effort prays under her breath as she works, her fingers slick with blood, guiding the infant into the world inch by inch while the girl beneath her clenches the sheets until her knuckles turn white. Margaret's face is wax pale, her lips trembling, her eyes unfocused. And then a thin, sharp cry. The air shifts. A boy is held up to the light, his skin flushed with the first effort of breathing. Henry Tudor, born into a room thick with the smell of pain and survival. For a moment, he rests on his mother's chest, his warmth pressed against her trembling frame. She looks at him, not with joy, not yet, but with something harder to name. Relief, wonder, fear. The cost is immediate and irreversible. The birth has torn her badly. The physician speaks quietly of injuries that will never truly heal. She will walk again, but she will never bear another child. At 13, her womb has given everything it ever will. The weeks that follow are slow and heavy. Fever comes in waves, leaving her shivering, then drenched in sweat. The nights are filled with dreams that wrench her from sleep, the sound of her own screams, the press of hands holding her down, the moment when her breath almost stopped. She flinches from touch, even from the gentle hand of a nurse. She longs for her son, and yet when she holds him, memories of the birth surge back, sharp enough to make her dizzy. Love and pain become entwined so tightly that she can no longer tell one from the other. Outside, the wind never stops. It rushes through the battlements and rattles the shutters, carrying the sea's eternal roar. Inside, Margaret learns to walk again, to move through the fortress with the slow grace of someone who has already learned that survival comes at a price that cannot be repaid. Imagine knowing this would be your first and last child, because of a choice you never made. If that thought stays with you, join us here on Cursed Chronicles. 1458. The child in Margaret's arms is scarcely a year old when she is summoned once more to the bargaining table of kings and nobles. Widowhood, in her world, is not freedom, it is vulnerability. A woman without a husband is a woman without a shield, and in the chaos creeping closer with every month, that is a risk too great to bear. The man chosen is Sir Henry Stafford, younger son of the Duke of Buckingham. He is Yorkist and leaning, his family tethered to the rising power of Edward, Earl of March, a man who will soon wear the crown as Edward IV. The match is a bridge across enemy waters, a Lancastrian heiress bound to a Yorkist sympathizer. It is protection disguised as union, a marriage meant to blunt the knives aimed at her from either side. The wedding is subdued. There are no feasts sprawling over days, no royal guests lining the benches. Instead, it is a carefully measured gesture, a signal to Yorkist eyes that Margaret is no threat, even as she keeps her Lancastrian bloodline intact. The vows are spoken in the soft light of a private chapel, the air heavy with incense. Margaret's voice is steady, her face unreadable. She has learned already the value of hiding her thoughts behind a mask. Life with Stafford is an exercise in balance. She must tread lightly, neither too warm toward Yorkist allies nor too cold to arouse suspicion. Jasper Tudor remains her anchor to the Lancastrian cause, but those communications must be rare, veiled, and without trace. Letters pass under the cover of merchant routes, their ink concealing meaning in the turn of a phrase or the choice of an innocuous word. Henry, her son, stays with Jasper at Pembroke. It is a decision made for his safety and for the cause. In Wales, under his uncle's watch, the boy is less exposed to Yorkist eyes, less likely to be seized as a pawn. But it is a separation that cuts deep. Margaret sees him rarely, those meetings arranged like diplomatic negotiations. Time, place, company all dictated by the tides of war. When she does see him, it is in brief hours stolen from the world outside. She studies his face, tracing the changes since their last meeting, the roundness of his cheeks thinning, the quickness in his step growing. She sends him away with gifts she has chosen carefully. A book to sharpen his mind, a garment to keep him warm, a token to remind him he is not forgotten. And then she returns to her other life, the careful smiles, the polite words, the dinner tables where every sentence is weighed and every silence is an answer. It is here, in this uneasy peace, that Margaret hones her skill for survival. She learns when to speak and when to listen, when to be seen and when to vanish into the background. She becomes fluent in the language of alliances, a language written not in ink, but in glances, in pauses, in the way one hand rests on another's arm just long enough to suggest agreement without promising it. Outside her walls, the tension builds toward another rupture. But inside, Margaret waits. She has been a child bride, a widow, a mother, a pawn. Now, she is becoming something else entirely, a player who understands the game well enough to survive it. If you think the most dangerous lessons in history are learned not on battlefields but in candlelit rooms, subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, where those shadows are given voice. 1461. The snow that year fell red, not in truth, but in memory, stained by the slaughter at Toten. It was the largest battle England had ever seen, and the bloodiest. More than 50,000 men met on a frozen Palm Sunday, and by nightfall, the fields were littered with bodies stiffening in the cold, their faces half buried in the slush. The clash decided more than the day's victor. It gave the crown to Edward of York, sealing the Yorkist ascendancy with steel and snow. For Margaret, the news reached her not in the roar of trumpets but in the quiet exchange of glances in her household hall. A Yorkist king now sat upon the throne. Her Lancastrian ties, to Jasper, to the cause, to the boy who carried its hope, were now liabilities that could undo her in an instant. Yet her marriage to Henry Stafford, with its Yorkist sympathies, placed her in a rare position. She was both shielded and exposed, protected by name but threatened by bloodline. It was in this treacherous climate that Margaret began to work in ways the chroniclers rarely note. She built alliances not only with men in power but with the women who moved behind them. Elizabeth Woodville, Edward Ivy's queen, was as much a survivor as she was, a woman who understood the art of turning whispers into weapons. Margaret of Anjou, exiled but unbroken, remained the figurehead of Lancastrian resistance. Margaret learned to stand in the spaces between them, drawing knowledge, favors, and influence from both sides without ever binding herself too tightly to either. It was not a friendship with any one woman that kept her alive. It was the network, the web of mutual obligations, traded confidences, and careful silences. A promise to relay a message, an introduction at a feast, a subtle reminder of shared interests, the kind of politics that left no paper trail, no clear evidence, only debts and loyalties owed in the shadows. In her own estates, Margaret turned necessity into mastery. Wars devoured men, and with them, the stewards and retainers who might once have managed her lands. She took the role herself. She learned the weight of coin, the timing of rents, the value of crops in lean years, the ways to negotiate with both tenant farmers and stubborn sheriffs. She studied the law, not in theory, but in the lived reality of disputes over boundaries, inheritance, and the obligations of vassals. Every judgment she rendered, every contract she sealed, deepened her understanding of how power was held and how it could be kept. Her public face remained serene, dutiful, loyal to her husband's Yorkist ties. But beneath that calm, she kept her lines to the Lancastrian cause intact. She wrote carefully worded letters to Jasper. She arranged for news of her son's health to reach her through merchants and friars. She placed small sums in the hands of those who might one day carry messages back to Wales. The Wars of the Roses were not won only in the shock of battle. They were fought in the slow work of survival, in the chambers where wine was poured and secrets traded, in the ledgers balanced by candlelight, in the decisions that seemed minor until they proved decisive. And Margaret was learning that, for a woman, survival was not merely about keeping one's head above the tide. It was about shaping the tide itself. If you believe the deadliest moves in history are often made without drawing a sword, stay with us here on Cursed Chronicles. Because Margaret Beaufort was only just beginning. 1471. The spring air carried the scent of crushed grass and iron. Tewkesbury had been another battle in a war already soaked in blood, but its ending was more than just defeat. It was annihilation. On that field, the Lancastrian cause was shattered. Prince Edward, the only son of Margaret of Anjou, lay dead among the trampled bodies. In London, within the cold stone of the Tower, Henry VI's life ended soon after. Quietly, efficiently, and under the shroud of natural causes no one truly believed. The red rose still bloomed, but it had no heir to wear it. For those who had bled for the House of Lancaster, there was only one thread left to cling to. A boy not yet 14, hidden away in Wales. Henry Tudor. The death lists from Tewkesbury and the Tower were more than records. They were invitations for vengeance. And Edward IV knew that to secure his crown, the last spark of Lancastrian blood must be snuffed out. That spark was Margaret's son. The decision came swiftly, without her knowledge. Jasper Tudor, knowing the net was tightening, gathered Henry and what few loyal men remained. Under the cover of night, they rowed hard for the coast, the salt wind carrying them toward the waiting ships. From there, the sea bore them to Brittany, a foreign shore where Yorkist hands could not yet reach. Margaret learned of it after the fact. No warning, no chance to see him before he vanished beyond England's grasp. She was told in hushed tones, the kind used when the truth is dangerous to repeat. Her son was gone, not taken by death, but by necessity. And though she understood the reason, the knowledge cut deeper than any blade. She pictured him on the deck of that ship, the horizon stretching endlessly before him. A boy exiled from the land of his birth, from the mother who had nearly died to give it to him. In Brittany, he would be safer, but safety was a cage of its own. It would keep him alive, but it would keep him from her. From that moment, Margaret's purpose sharpened into something unyielding. Every move, every word, every alliance would now be weighed against one question. Would it bring her son home? Yet the path forward was treacherous. Edward Ivy's spies were everywhere. The wrong whisper in the wrong ear could see her stripped of her lands, imprisoned, or worse. Still, she began to weave her plans in silence, planting seeds that might take years to bear fruit. And in the dark hours of night, when sleep refused her, she would stare into the candle's flame and imagine the day the tide would turn, when the boy she had cradled in Pembroke Castle would return, not as a fugitive, but as a king. Would you risk treason and your life just for the chance to bring your child home? Drop your answer below. The years after Henry's exile hardened Margaret into something the girl of Bletsoe could never have imagined. She had been pawn, bride, mother, widow. Now, she would become a player. And in the game that England had become, only those who mastered survival could hope to shape the end. Her path crossed with Thomas Stanley, a man whose name stirred as much suspicion as it did respect. He was no idealist, no loyalist to any single crown. Stanley had survived the shifting tides of York and Lancaster alike, his loyalty always pledged to the winning side at precisely the right moment. His influence was measured not just in titles, but in the men he could summon at will, thousands of seasoned soldiers who answered to him, not to king or cause. To marry him was no act of romance. It was political engineering. As Stanley's wife, Margaret gained more than protection. She acquired access. Access to the court without kneeling too deep in its traps. Access to the whispers of strategy from both factions, carried into her hearing under the guise of domestic conversation. And perhaps most importantly, access to the one thing she needed most: mobility. In a realm where travel and correspondence were watched for signs of rebellion, being the wife of Thomas Stanley meant she could move, write, and receive with fewer questions asked. Her estates remained under her hand, a rare privilege for a woman in such times, and she wielded them with calculated care. She did not flaunt her Lancastrian loyalties, but neither did she let them fade. Through merchants whose trade routes stretched from Brittany to London, she sent small, coded letters to her son. Inked in phrases that meant nothing to an untrained eye, they carried messages of reassurance, of counsel, of quiet defiance. She asked no details of his life there, too dangerous, but she found ways to learn them nonetheless. A passing sailor might speak of a tall, reserved youth in the Breton court. A cloth merchant might note the colors he favored or the company he kept. Every scrap of news she gathered and stored, building a picture of the man who would, she still believed, one day wear the crown. Living with Stanley required its own form of warcraft. He was not a man to be trusted fully. He played too many games to allow for that. But he was a man to be understood. She studied his manner in the council chamber, the way he weighed his words at court, the subtle pauses that revealed when he was committing to a side or keeping his options open. She learned when to press him for favor and when to let silence do the work. To outsiders, she appeared loyal to her husband and dutiful to the reigning Yorkist king. To those who looked closer and dared to see, she was something else entirely. A woman biding her time, gathering pieces, moving in shadows where men thought themselves alone. The son she had once cradled as a fragile newborn in a freezing chamber was now a man in exile. She could not yet bring him home, but she could ensure that when the moment came, the ground beneath England's throne would already be tilting in his favor. If you think the most dangerous player in a war is the one you can't see coming, stay with us here on Cursed Chronicles, because Margaret Beaufort was about to prove it. 1483. The realm shifted in a single breath. Edward IV was dead, sudden, without warning, and the Yorkist crown passed to his 12-year-old son, Edward V. But in the weeks that followed, the boy was not crowned. Instead, his uncle, Richard of Gloucester, moved with quiet precision, sweeping aside those who stood between him and the throne. The boy king and his younger brother were taken to the Tower of London for their safety. They would never leave it alive. Whispers became certainty. The princes in the tower had vanished, their bodies unseen, their fate sealed by silence. In that silence, the Yorkist claim began to rot. Richard III crowned himself not as protector, but as king, a man whose rule was born under the shadow of murder. To Margaret Beaufort, the moment was both horror and opportunity. The House of York was bleeding legitimacy, and in the vacuum, a claim stronger than Richard's could rise, her son's. From within her constrained life, she began to pull at the threads of rebellion. She forged an alliance with Bishop John Morton, a man of sharp mind and sharper intent, who was as willing as she to gamble everything on Lancaster's return. Plans were laid, messages smuggled, promises inked in invisible strokes. The uprising of 1483, the Buckingham Rebellion, was to be the spark. But sparks can be smothered. The plot failed, crushed beneath Richard's swift retribution. Margaret paid the price. Her lands were confiscated. Her freedom narrowed to the confines of her husband's custody. Officially, she was under house arrest, bound to obedience. But even under watch, she did not yield. The walls that contained her body could not contain her reach. She continued her work in whispers and in code, through servants and merchants whose loyalty was bought with coin, with promises, with belief in the cause she carried. 2 years passed. And then, in the summer of 1485, the horizon shifted again. Henry landed at Milford Haven, the same Welsh coast where his life had begun. He came not as a fugitive, but as a commander, his banner unfurling in the wind, bearing the red dragon of Cadwallader. Word of his arrival spread like fire across the hills and valleys, carried by riders who knew which doors to knock upon. Thomas Stanley, master of the undecided, stood poised between two kings. His men could tilt the battle. His heart, or perhaps his calculation, leaned toward the son of his wife. And on the field of Bosworth, it was Stanley's betrayal that broke Richard's hold. The charge came swift and final. Richard III, the last Plantagenet king, fell amidst the crush of steel and mud, crying treason to the wind. The crown, found on the field, was set not on the victor's head by his own hand, but by Stanley's, lifting it high before placing it upon Henry's brow. Henry VII was king, and Margaret Beaufort was no longer just the mother of a fugitive. She was My Lady the King's mother, a title without precedent, carrying authority and reverence that no woman in England had held before. She shaped court, influenced policy, and saw her son secure the Tudor line with a marriage that bound York and Lancaster in uneasy peace. Her life stretched into the reign of her grandson, Henry VIII. But in June 1509, just days after his coronation, Margaret's time ended. The woman who had been a child bride, a near-dead mother, a widow, a conspirator, and a kingmaker, was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey. Her tomb bore no crown, no sword, only the likeness of a woman in prayer. And yet, the arc of her story never truly left that freezing Pembroke bedchamber, where a 13-year-old girl brought a fragile boy into a brutal world. Everything that followed, the alliances, the betrayals, the wars, was shaped by that moment. A moment where she should have died, but didn't. A moment where the fate of England began in blood and cold and the will of a girl who refused to vanish. CTA. If you believe that history's greatest survivors are often the ones no one expected to endure, stay with us here on Cursed Chronicles, because there are more shadows yet to walk through.